Hi, everyone. My name is Kaitlyn Pavia. I'm a 1L at Brooklyn Law School, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm really excited about this panel. Um, before starting law school, I worked for 3 years at the Center for Family Representation in Queens, working in parent defense. And so that's what inspired me to plan this event today, along with Professor Lorr, who I will introduce. But we're really excited for the panelists we have today. Um, and I will introduce them now. So today we have filling in for Joyce McMillan, who actually was unable to join us. We have Ericka Brewington. Ericka is an advocate and activist to abolish areas of the child welfare system. She was born and raised in Harlem and mother to 4 beautiful children. She has worked as an administrative assistant for several large legal firms or organizations, and she is trained as a home health aide. Thank you for joining us, Ericka. We have Lisa Sangoi, who is co-founder and co-director of Movement for Family Power, which works to end the foster system's policing and punishment of families and to create a world where the dignity and integrity of all families is valued and supported. Given the intersection of the drug war and the child welfare system, Lisa spends quite a bit of time learning about drug use, pregnancy, and parenting, and she regularly consults on related child welfare cases and legislation throughout the country. Lisa has previously worked or interned at the NYU Law Family Defense Clinic, National Advocates for Pregnant Women, Women's Prison Association, Incarcerated Mothers Law Project, and Brooklyn Defender Services Family Defense Practice, among other organizations. We're also joined today by Miriam Mack. Miriam Mack is policy counsel to the Bronx Defenders Family Defense Practice. Prior to joining the Bronx Defenders, Miriam was a legal fellow at the American Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts, focusing on issues of racial and reproductive justice. Thereafter, she clerked for the Honorable Solomon Oliver Jr. in the Northern District of Ohio, and then the Honorable Justice Geraldine S. Hines of the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts. During law school, Miriam participated in the criminal clinic, representing indigent juvenile and adult clients charged with crimes in the Boston Municipal Court, and interned at the Harvard Legal Aid Bureau, where she represented indigent clients in housing matters. Miriam Mack received her JD from Boston University School of Law. So thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you to our three amazing panelists for joining us today. As I said, I'll be co-moderating this panel with Professor Sarah Lorr, who was a parent defender at Brooklyn Defender Services before joining the BLS community as assistant professor of clinical law and the co-director of the Disability and Civil Rights Clinic. So before I turn it over to Professor Lorr to kind of frame this issue for everybody with us today, just a few logistical things. Throughout the panel, you can feel free to chat any questions you might have to Professor Lorr, and we'll do our best to sprinkle those questions in throughout the next hour. And then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for people to raise hands and ask some questions directly to the panelists. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Professor Lorr.
Thank you, Kaitlyn. And really, I just want to start by saying how thrilled I am to be here today and really to have this fantastic panel, and grateful for Kaitlyn to organizing the event and bringing our panelists together, and especially Ericka for joining us so last minute. I think you'll be more than a substitute for Joyce, I know. You'll be your own person, but we're really happy to have you here. So I just want to say the panelists who are with us today are really true visionaries and leaders. So I don't want to take much time away from them. I just want to spend a few minutes framing our conversation with just sort of like my goal is to kind of lay out a little bit of like the what, the who, and the why when we talk about the family regulation system. And by and large, you know, people call this system now by many names. I think Dorothy Roberts, the scholar and professor, came up with that particular term, and it's the term that I've come to favor, but you could call it the family policing system, the family destruction system. It's also called the child welfare system, more generally. So first, I really, oh, and I want to say my internet has been terrible. So if I start to break up, somebody should let me know, Kaitlyn, and then I will turn off my screen. So you can hear me, but not see me. Okay, so I just want to start with like, to be really clear for people who are less initiated, what we're talking about when we talk about like so-called abuse and neglect. And I think it helps to be really specific. So of the 8 million approximate reports that come in every year, 45% of those are just immediately screened out as just trash and not realistic. 60% are founded in what we call neglect. And I'm going to talk more about that in a second, but I just want to really be clear, 3% of those collectively are sex abuse, any kind of physical abuse ranging from spanking to something more severe. So that's just already a very tiny number. 0.02% are fatalities. So of the 60% of the cases that allege neglect, what are we talking about? Overwhelmingly, we're talking about parents living in poverty and families living in poverty. We're talking about allegations maybe of mold, exposed wirings, a parent heating her apartment in winter with an open stove, crowded living situations, that kind of, so I just want to set the scene accurately for us. Studies have shown that 30% of children in foster care could come home if their parents had better housing. And part of why I think it's so important to talk about this is that it reveals the extent to which the family regulation system is not actually targeting behaviors, but is instead targeting poor, largely Black families. The same behaviors in wealthier families and whiter households go on without blame, without harm, without family separation. Consider marijuana use or leaving your child home alone when you go into the backyard to have a glass of wine. These are what we think of as like very traditional, very totally safe white middle class behaviors that do not get labeled as neglect or abuse. This connects to the question of who are impacted. And I think our panelists will talk about this too, but we can't talk about this without just being really clear that the foster care system in this country overwhelmingly targets Black families. In New York, more than 94% of the reports are called against people of color. 25% of children in foster care are Black. That's where we have in our overall population, 14% of children are Black. And 53% of all Black children, that's more than half of all Black children, will be potentially investigated as potential victims of abuse or neglect. At the same time, once Black children enter the foster care system, they're less likely to be placed with family or kinship providers. Again, what does this tell us? As Dorothy Roberts has reasoned, it would appear less that the system is policing or regulating behaviors and more that it's policing and regulating people of a certain status in our society, largely poor Black families. And finally, there's many reasons why we need to be considering the question of reimagining or abolishing the system. And I think our panelists today are really gonna speak to many of them. But just one to get us started is the affirmative and active harm that the system is causing every day. The forcible separation of family is a trauma. You do not need to be a parent separated from your child or a child separated from your parents to know this. We know this instinctively. We imagine sleepless nights, anxiety, the deterioration of physical and mental health that ensue for parents and children when they're forced apart. And we saw our nation respond instinctively when this became a part of Trump's immigration policies. We reacted with horror to the immigration policy that forcibly separated parents and children. And so I want to make very clear that this harm that occurs in the system day in and day out with stunning regularity doesn't come with aid or assistance. It comes as a harm. So I'm going to turn over to the panelists who I'm so eager to hear from today. And I just want to thank you all for joining us. And I really look forward to hearing sort of the many reasons we need to take seriously the task of reimagining and rebuilding the system. And I guess actually I'm going to really turn it over to Kaitlyn, who's going to ask our first question.
Yes, thank you, Professor Lorr. So first I'm going to start with a question to Miriam, but Lisa and Ericka should feel free to add as well, of course. So Miriam, for people who have less familiarity with the child welfare system, there's often an assumption that the system operates to protect children, but beyond that, there's little knowledge of how the system itself operates. Can you describe how the system functions and why it's problematic?
Yeah, thank you, Kaitlyn, and thank you for arranging this incredible panel. I'm honored to be here to talk with y'all today, and especially honored to be on this panel with Lisa and Ericka, both of whom I have learned from and continue to learn from. And so I'm just super happy to be able to share space with them. So the notion that the family regulation system is a system of protection is false. There's no protection to be found in the system. Rather, like its sister policing systems, and we talk about the criminal legal system, talk about the immigration system. It's a system that is based really fundamentally from its inception as a system of surveillance, monitoring, control, and punishment. And when I say that surveillance and monitoring is central to the family regulation system, it's based on the notion that BIPOC communities, and most especially Black communities, Indigenous communities, are not to be trusted, that they have to be constantly watched under the watchful eye of the government, because Black parenting, Indigenous parenting is automatically suspect, is automatically lesser, and it's automatically used as a justification for expansive government intrusion. And the family regulation system, I think we need to think about it sort of expansively, because it deputizes professionals in other areas to act as an arm of the family regulation system. So that means that there's few places that BIPOC people can go and exist and be without being watched by the government, right? There's few, not the home, not schools, not doctors, not places where you get social services, not parks, not anywhere. It's the family regulation system creates this all-encompassing watching, right? This all-encompassing judgment, and the judgment that is founded on, that's based on racism, patriarchy, classism. I think the point that Professor Lorr made is a really good point, right? The family regulation system is in the business of regulating poverty, but I also think that it's in the business, it's not regulating certain behaviors, but it's the person who does the behaviors, right? Because we know that there are certain things that are deemed to be acceptable when you're white, when you're a person of class privilege. And that very same thing done as a poor person, as a Black person, as an Indigenous person, is deemed to be inadequate parenting, is deemed to be justification for separating your family, for surveilling your family expansively, for controlling your family, right? So it's really about regulating people. It's not about keeping anyone safe. It's certainly not about keeping children safe. And I think that, I really want to sort of underscore that the widespread surveillance ensures that there is a steady stream of people being funneled into the system to ensure that the system continues, right? The constant watching, and I'm not saying the constant watching in the sense of there is a justification because, oh, we saw you do something that justifies the government for intervening. No, but it's a constant watching and a judgment that's based on racism, classism, and a need to control Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. And when I talk about control, and I don't want to go on too long because y'all really need to be hearing from Ericka and from Lisa, but when I talk about control, it's obvious. You see that the majority of the interventions of the family regulation system, they're not interventions to address the sort of structural issues that we have set up and let exacerbate and go on in this country: poverty, failure to actually support the infrastructure that is needed for families to be able to thrive. It's not addressing that, right? It's all about changing the behaviors of that individual parent, right? It's all about what can we do to modify how you act in your family, right? There's no sort of actual concrete or material resources that the family regulation system provides to families. And I'm not suggesting that if the family regulation system, if ACS were to be modified to give a stipend here or a stipend there, then that would necessarily be a system that I think is acceptable. But I do think that it actually is very telling that we have mountains of studies showing that just giving people money will alleviate what the system points to as neglect, right? Just giving people money, but yet we decide not to do that. And that is a political choice that I think that we have to reckon with. It's a political choice that reveals what the system is about. And it's not about supporting people. It's not about doing what actually, taking the steps that actually need to be taken to alleviate what the system deems as neglect, but it's really just about controlling families. And I also want to point out that this control has historic roots, right? It's been an effective policy of the United States to break apart BIPOC families, right? Because I think there's a real realization that when you break apart families and when you weaken communities, you weaken people's ability to actually resist the systems that are oppressing them, right? And so it's not a surprise that the family separation was a tactic used with Black enslaved Americans, right? It's not a surprise that family separation was an explicit tactic used with Indigenous communities in this country. And it shouldn't come as a surprise that the gross disparities throughout the family regulation system are the starkest with Black and Indigenous families. So it is just a trend that has started from the family regulation system's inception and continues today. And with that, I want to pass it to some of our other panelists because I want y'all to hear from them. We have great panels.
Before anybody else actually speaks, I don't want to interrupt the flow too much, but I did just want to welcome Halimah Washington, who's also joining us today. Halimah, I don't know if you want to take just a moment to introduce yourself. Some of you may have seen her speak earlier this week, doing just an incredible job advocating and speaking truth. But I don't know, Halimah, if you want to just take a moment or if you want to respond to what Miriam has so clearly spoken on.
I would just take this time to introduce myself. Apologies for my tardiness, and thank you all for your patience. I'm honored to be here today with you all. My name is Halimah Washington, and I am a mom on the margins. I am a mother of 4. And I'm a community member here in the Bronx. I do a lot of advocacy, activism, and organizing around child welfare, criminal justice, reproductive justice, transformative justice, restorative justice, and healing justice is at the core of all of those things. And so when I think about the movement to dismantle child welfare or divest from the family regulation system and into communities, I think about what it means to actually give families that are impoverished money. There's this belief that if we provide folks with the resources necessary for them to thrive, somehow that's going to impact everybody else's ability to thrive. But that only pertains to families of color in communities that are impoverished or people that are parenting on the margins. So I don't want to just erase dads out of the picture, but dads are oftentimes erased in the family regulation system as well. And so I'm not a dad, so I'm not really here to speak for the dads. I can speak more for the moms and what it means for me as an impacted parent. No, I have not had my children removed, but I have had family regulation investigation or the family regulation system in my life since before I was actually born. And I'm pushing 40. So this system has been around and in my life and causing harm, and it is continuing to cause harm in my family's life. And instead of actually supporting or being what they claim to be support, they have just continued to cause harm and continue to create separation within my family. And I think, oh yeah, and I also work at Rise Magazine. I'm the community coordinator there. And I love the work. It affords me the opportunity to show up in my full complexities and all of my identities. And that feels really wonderful as a parent on the margins, not having to compartmentalize myself when I show up to work. I can actually do this work and plant the seeds of revolution in the parents that I work with and help them to understand that they are not the problems and have not been the problems, but what actually is the problem is the systems that they have been interfacing with throughout their whole lives and even before they were born. The system that was designed and is designed to not see their humanity and dehumanize them at every single turn. And any time BIPOC people interface with any system, we have to understand that these systems were founded on dehumanizing certain groups of people or BIPOC people. It was meant to not see the humanity in those groups of people. And so when we think about those groups of people trying to get support from these same systems, how can they get support if this system is designed to not see them as worthy of support because it doesn't see their humanity? It's like it doesn't make sense, and nobody can ever make it make sense to me. And that is why I be out here with the parents and in these streets planting these seeds of revolution, and watering the seeds of revolution in folks that it has already been planted in. I'm happy to talk more with folks, but I want to give Ericka an opportunity to shine. Hey, Ericka, how you doing, girl? I want to give her an opportunity to share what she needs to share. And yeah, thank you for having me here, y'all.
Thank you so much, Halimah. I'm really glad that you're able to join us today for this conversation. And thank you, Miriam, for laying the groundwork of basically how the family regulation system is really just a system of surveillance. So yes, I agree with Halimah. I would love to hear from Ericka, her thoughts, as well as Lisa. So please feel free to address the question or speak to whatever you'd like to speak to today.
I'm sorry. I want to thank you for having me here. I wanted to apologize. And hey, Queen Halimah, but I need to hear the question again because my daughter was on my tablet with her therapist and she came in so I can make arrangements for the next session. So I didn't hear a lot. So can you just say the question to me one more time? And
yeah.
I give you all the answers I have.
Of course, of course. So the original question was basically, how does the system actually function and why is it problematic? But if you'd like, you can also go into in what ways you feel the family regulation system needs to be changed.
It needs to be done with. It needs to be, as I like to say, gutted to the foundation and rebuilt. Because it's wrong on every level. Number one, I don't think ACS should be the end all be all. Like they word shouldn't be law. Like they come in your house and just because you say something to them they don't like, or you demand a little respect because you are a human being, they take it the wrong way and find you disrespectful. And then you know what? I have authority, so I can make your life hell. You feel me? Prime example, she came in here. I know she's younger than me because I'm pushing 50. Right? I'll be 50 in September. I know she's younger than me. Respect me as your elder. Respect me as a human being, but respect me as your elder. Then you come in my house and you want to show disrespect. That, number one, nobody is raised like that. I don't know about everybody. I wasn't. You are to respect the home you walk into. So don't come in here with your accusations, throwing your accusations. And don't come in here with an attitude. Talk to me. You heard something? Talk to me. Let's talk about it. And don't get mad because I know my rights. But then don't get mad because I actually tell you now you can't come in, get a warrant. You know what I mean? You're not the end all be all, but that's the problem. They need more than one person to say that a child is neglected in a manner of speaking. Because their neglect umbrella is too broad. What they say is neglect is not neglect to me. You know what I'm saying? So what a parent does a narcotic? So what? As long as the children wasn't around, there's food in the house, they're clean and they're happy, I don't find that to be neglect. I really don't. But just because I might have smoked some marijuana today and next week it's still in my system doesn't mean I'm smoking marijuana every day. You know what I mean? But that's how they see it. And I neglected my kids just because I smoked that marijuana, even though they wasn't here. I smoked the marijuana, but because it's in my system, I'm neglecting them. How am I neglecting them if it's a refrigerator full of food, they're clean and they're happy? And my house is not a mess. My house is a mess, maybe because there's toys all over the place. But who runs around cleaning up behind the kids? I don't. I make the mess. When you go to bed, I'll clean it up. We start all over tomorrow. That's how I look at it. But no, that's not how she looked at it. So I'm wrong. Plus, I'm in a 2-bedroom and I have 4 kids. This is what I can afford. And there was no empty apartments in my complex. What am I supposed to do? Build another bedroom? Am I supposed to go downstairs and force my property manager to give me a bigger apartment? No, I can't. So they got me on that. Plus, it's my mouth. My mouth is totally reckless. I mean, a sailor look at me and talk about, wow, really? That's how bad my mouth is. So then she got upset about it because I know my rights. You're not going to disrespect me in my house. And then they made an accusation where I can speak for a dad because I have the dad in my house. You know what they actually told me? If I was to get rid of him, my kids would come home. And I'm like, y'all ask, the first thing you ask in the Black and brown families is, where's the dad? I have the dad, so now you're saying kick him out. You can't have it both ways. Either y'all want a family unit or you want me to be a single parent. Make up your mind. You know what I'm saying? Everybody's always complaining, oh, the black father's not around, black father's not around, black father's not around. I have my black father around, and now you're saying, nah, kick him out, kick him out, kick him out. Nah, we're not doing that. And what I don't like, when they take the kids and they try to separate the mother and the father, more along the lines of he get his own lawyer, I get my own lawyer. I don't understand that. Y'all took them from us together. Shouldn't we have the same lawyer because we have the same interest? Wouldn't that make more sense? Oh, we trying to protect. No, you give me a social worker, all he get is a lawyer, and then y'all want me to sign everything because I keep saying they're my kids. Those are his kids too. Why can't he sign a piece of paper? Why can't he make a decision? Why always have to be me, me, me? That's why that's why a lot of fathers feel dejected and don't want to be bothered, and they walk away because that's how the system makes them feel. Now, as far as abolishing ACS and what should we replace it with, I think we should go back to the village. Remember, this is for the older ones. When we used to grow up and there's that one lady on the block when our parents was at work and she watched all of us, that's what we should go back to, having that village. And it's easy. It's really easy to do. That's when everybody supported everybody. You know what I'm saying? If Miss Vicky had a problem, Miss Sally came and helped, or Mr. Willie came and helped, or Miss Laura came and helped. You know what I'm saying? Miss Vicky was the only one on my block that didn't have the father in the house. You know, they all rallied around her, made sure her girls was good, food was in her house, stuff was fixed. If she needed a man to come in and put in the light or paint the wall or whatever, that's what happened, or help her up with her groceries, that's what happened. Us as kids, we helped her. The older kids helped her. We babysat her kids and we did whatever we had to make sure she had a good life. That's what we need to go back to. Instead, we have so many haters that the first thing they do is call ACS. And a lot of people are calling it as, being vindictive and being petty. And that's why a lot of these cases are around, because somebody was mad at someone else and they called ACS just to make their life happen.
I think that speaks to like even the being a mandated reporter or the malicious calls that are being made and how people are even able to make those malicious calls because of anonymity. And like, if you're anonymous, of course, you're going to be calling and making these allegations and these reports. And then in terms of like the workers that tend to come out, they're trained to see deficit and not trained to see asset in poverty or in impoverishment. And it's like, as a person that is I live in Hunts Point, in the hood. And because of the work that I do, I have to be asset. I have to be asset-based. I have to see asset, or else I'll be walking around here as a ticking time bomb. If I'm thinking everything around me and everybody around me is deficit-based, there's a problem with everybody and every single person around me. No, that's impossible. I believed that for a long time though, because I went into a product of the New York City education system. And that's the first place you learn that you're a problem, especially when you're a Black or brown person. It's like, and then I'm a black woman that was once upon a time a Black girl with an abundant body. And it's just like all of the things that I've learned about myself and my body and people that look like me, and that I will never have actual complete control over my body or what comes from my body. That foundation is like, it's really hard working to unlearn those things about yourself and about the people around you. That takes intentional work to be strength-based and to see the strengths in people, and not only see the strengths in people, but your interconnectedness and like the world as an ecosystem, and we're all a part of it and we're all interconnected. So if something is ailing in one part of the ecosystem, the whole ecosystem is ailing, not just that one part. And we've convinced ourselves that it's just the one part. And so if we just ignore that one part, then somehow the rest of us are going to be fine. When in reality, it impacts us all. When people are unhappy and unhealthy, that impacts everyone else, because now their behaviors are going to be unhappy and unhealthy. So what would it mean to make people happy and healthy? This stimulus check, I'm going to talk about the stimulus because I just got my stimulus today and I'm feeling like a millionaire. It's not $1 million, but when you're in poverty, it's like you feel like you're a millionaire because now you have these extra funds, and you now have an opportunity to, like, for a moment, think about joy, or for a moment be in the seat of joy and thinking about, oh, you know what? Maybe I can get those sneakers or that shirt or that material thing that brings me joy. But for somebody on the outside looking in, it's like, how dare you? How dare you do something that you enjoy? How dare you spend on yourself or bring yourself joy when you're in poverty or you're impoverished? I was just telling the ladies in Rise today, yeah, you can go and spend your whole stimulus on your bills and all of those things, and that may bring you joy, but I'm gonna say, go ahead and get that piece of cake or that shirt or that hairdo or whatever it is that brings you joy. That extra $5 you got to spend on your nails, do that thing. Do that thing, because there are not many moments that you're going to get or have extra money to do these things, because the world is going to open back up and things are going to be back to normal. And what does it look like for us to, like, engage and indulge for the moment? Even if it's like, oh, you know what? You want to spend your money on that loud pack this time? You've been smoking the regular this whole time and you want to do your thing. Bring your heart joy. And the fact that other people are coming in and determining what brings you joy and all of these things is just like, that's not okay. And if that helps you to be a better parent or show up for your children and your family in ways that you haven't been able to do before, why is it that if a report is made, then now all of a sudden you are the problem? Anytime a report is made, it's always the parent is the problem or the child is the problem. It is never the system is the problem. The fact that the system has to respond to these things is never the problem. It's starting to be, because we're having panels like this and we're going around and having these discussions in these places. And I'm really, what brings me the most joy about the work that's being done in the criminal justice space and the work that's being done in the family regulation space is the folks that are impacted most by the problem are the folks that are being lifted up and leading the work. And so there's a certain level of investment that's being done in impacted parents and impacted people in general that wasn't done before. Now what we need is for the funding world to catch up. That's what we need. But it's like everything that we've been needing to save us, we've already had. The problem is other people have been coming in trying to tell us the things that we need, but they're coming in with a deficit lens as opposed to an asset lens. Whereas the people that are inside, we have to have an asset lens, because if we don't believe in ourselves, how we even going to survive? And we ain't even touched the topic of thriving yet, but it's about surviving when you're impoverished, when you're in poverty. And what do you need to survive? The belief that you can survive. And if somebody is coming in telling you that you don't even have the ability to survive, yeah, we're not jacking that. We're not accepting that.
Halimah
And with that,
Ericka,
I'm gonna pass it to Lisa.
No,
real quick.
yes,
To
please, Ericka.
elaborate on her with the funding, I could fix that all in one shot. Instead of funding foster parents, fund the parents. Instead of giving them the check every month, give us the check to take care of our kids. Because if you see we're in poverty, that's what we need, is money. So instead of giving them the $1,500 a month you're giving them for my kids have autism, give me the $1,500 so I can move out, get a bigger apartment, get them their services, and do whatever I need to do that you say I'm not doing to take care of my kids. That's how you abolish ACS. Take the money from them that they're giving these foster parents, and then they're training the foster parents. Come train me. Give me the money. Give all of us parents that you have in the system that money. When you knock on our door, instead of saying, "Yo, we're coming to remove your kids," no, we're coming to help you because we heard you need a little bit of help. That's what you should do. Now we can give it off to Lisa.
Ericka and Halimah, thank you both so much. I mean, you've given us, from your talk initially, Ericka, about authority and the way it's misused and the way families are really separated and divided against each other. And then really the beautiful concepts of ecosystem and visioning a village. We're going to get to visioning the village, I hope, time permitting, because I think it's so important and really speaks to, Halimah, what you're talking about asset focused and breaking away from deficit lens thinking. But I wanted to actually follow up on something Halimah said really specifically that ties in with a student's question. Zach Hirschfield asked a question about specifically how we think about, or we should think about, connections between child welfare, public education, and truancy laws. And Halimah, you were talking about your childhood experience as a Black woman and how you experienced this public school system. So I'd love to hear about that. And then from Lisa, just more broadly, how all of these systems fit into the carceral state. So maybe we'll start with Halimah and then shift to Lisa, and then if anyone else has anything to add.
Yeah, for me, it's, I think about the education to prison pipeline, or the education to prison pipeline, and then also the foster care to prison pipeline. So if we're talking about like education and being a Black person in a school that is basically not honoring the way that you learn or honoring anything about your humanity. Oftentimes these students and people are pushed out. You're pushed out by policies and rules and all of the things. And then you end up feeling like, again, it's a deficit lens. And if you're in a space that is meant to look at you as a problem, then that's what happens. You become a problem. And anyone that challenges any of the policies or rules within that space, you have to extinguish them, or you have to put them on a track to like not believing in themselves. And that's the goal. And that's what happens. And so now you have these children that are not believing in themselves, and then they don't want to go to school anymore. Why would you want to go into a place that is trying to extinguish your light? Or trying to extinguish your humanity. So now you get caught up in the truancy laws. And instead of, oftentimes you don't even have the language to articulate what is happening or what is harming you in these spaces. And so You just don't show up. And it shows up as anger, resentment, fighting, lashing out. And so what are those, how does society handle those things? They don't offer you support. They throw your ass in prison. You go to jail. And so now you're in prison. And this is what was supposed to happen. And for those kids that are in foster care that were already society's throwaways, or society has already decided that these kids don't need to be thrown away, it's like it's only a matter of time before they're in prison. And for my story, it was I went into a group home, and because I kept running away from the group home, but the issue was I was having issues at home. My mom, it was a single mom of 4 children. She's working, and they're 4 girls. And so we're running rampant, and she's running, trying to be behind us and all of the things. And it's like every system that she's interfacing with, again, is seeing her as the problem and seeing us as a problem. So in turn, instead of her seeing that she needed to support us, she saw us as the problem too. And then we started to believe that we were problems. And so we began to act out, and we were put into the system. And instead of the system supporting and helping us, we were still again seen as problems. So eventually for me, it led to me going from a group home and into juvenile justice because I was running away too much and they didn't know what else to do with me. And so I was incarcerated from 14 to 18 years old because it was for my own safety. And so since then, I've come to understand what was working. But for a long time, I was really, really angry and resentful at my mom for throwing us away or being okay with the fact that we were thrown away, not understanding fully that she had been thrown away. And so as a person that was thrown away, it was easier for her to throw away her own children. Or so I thought. But it wasn't easy for her. It was a challenge, and it became if it's me versus them, I need to survive for myself. I don't even have it within me to give it to my daughters or do anything for my children because everything is up against me. I have all of these things to hold. I can't hold my children too. And so with that, I will pass it to Lisa.
All right.
I hope that answered the question too.
No problem. Thank you.
All right. All right. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
It answered the question beautifully. And if you're not one of the speakers, we just ask that you mute. And now I will pass it to Lisa.
Hey everybody, my name is Lisa Sangoi and I use she and her pronouns. It is an enormous honor to share space with the freedom fighters here on the panel today. I also just want to say that I'm a little bit here with a heavy heart. What's happened in this country in the past 24 hours is just totally horrific and violent, and just sending so much love and solidarity to the AAPI folks out in the audience right now. To everyone in the audience, thank you for giving us your time and your attention. This is, it's, really important that we're all here together to be talking about these things. So, I want to pick up on a couple of themes that have been emerging on the panel and zoom us out a little bit historically. So, we're hearing a lot about poverty and like how we just are not trusting Black and brown parents, and in particular Black mamas, with resources and money, right? How the system is not trusting Black mamas with resources and money. And I think it's really important to remember that there is a deep, deep, deep history behind this, right? Throughout the history of this country has been very, very, very committed to resourcing people so long as those people are white people, right? So in the 1950s, over 60% of white people, right? We are talking about the majority of white people supported a federal jobs guarantee, something that's considered socialist now, right? A majority of white people supported universal, single payer, government paid healthcare. A majority of white people supported public funding of not just schools, but universities, right? A majority of white people supported government subsidized loans for housing, so long as all of that went to build the white middle class. And it happened, right? So like with the GI Bill of the 1940s, the federal government poured hundreds of billions of dollars into building a white middle class, into funding. When you look and you see the vast amounts of housing, beautiful housing white people have owned for generations and centuries, that was built by the government. It is government subsidized housing. When you look at these beautiful universities, right? You look at Columbia University, all these like massive, beautiful institutions. They have a lot of that money from various sources, include, you know, enormously unjust sources, including government subsidized loans through the GI Bill, where the government paid for white veterans to go to school to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, right? And then what happens is the civil rights movement reaches sort of an apex in the 1960s, and Black people, in particular Black mamas and allies, come to the forefront and say, hey, like all of this enormous government assistance has been available to white people for centuries. Their wealth, their well-being has literally been building on our backs because like we were all getting taxed for their loans, for their housing, for their education. We now want ours. We want a federal jobs guarantee. We want a caretaking income. We want a minimum wage, right? We want into labor unions. Labor unions did not let Black and brown people in, right? They said, we want all this stuff that white people have been getting forever. We want it now. We want to inherit money from our parents. Like you know, all the things that ensure health and well-being, we want these things. And as you can imagine, white support for all of these things that was well above 50% dropped to 20 and 30%. And you had a very rapid privatization of healthcare, of education, of housing, right? And so that very much created the enormous amounts of poverty and wealth inequality that we now see today. And what does this have to do with the foster system, with the family regulation system? What the family regulation system does is it takes a person not having housing, right? A Black mother not having housing, a brown mother not having housing. And it says, this is your fault. It's not the fault of centuries of inequality. It's not the fault of redlining. It's not because we have literally made sure that you and your descendants and your ancestors will not have housing. It is actually your fault and the fault of some like controlled substance that you use. So the family regulation system is very much part of a neoliberal framework that cultivates this idea of individual responsibility, right? What the wealthy and the white have is because what this really horrific sort of horror story, what it fabricates is what wealthy and white people have is because they work so hard and they are individually, you know, they have individual responsibility. And the Black and brown folks that don't have stuff, it's because they are lazy and they just want to live off of the government. The family regulation system is a big part of maintaining that myth, maintaining that racial and economic order. And that is a big part of how it is a part of the carceral state. So, you know, people have been talking about housing and how, you know, 30%, if 30% of kids in the foster system, if their parents just had housing, right, they could go back home. So, you know, another sort of side of this that I'm trying to really figure out how to do messaging around is we spend about $30 billion a year on the foster system. We spend about $30 billion a year total on housing for low-income folks, you know, with low incomes. So we could shift that 30 billion into housing, right? And literally send 30% of the kids home. But that's not enough. That's not enough because we spend $90 billion a year subsidizing the housing of wealthy people. Believe it or not, wealthy people in this country, they have their housing subsidized by the federal government by things like the mortgage interest tax deduction, there being not being a wealth tax and stuff to the tune of $90 billion a year. So I think what the child welfare system does is it both creates this myth around how, you know, low-income people, and particularly Black and brown low-income people, sort of are living the lives that they do because it's their fault. And it allows the amount of money the government is spending, right? The foster system is one of the biggest sources of money for low-income people. It's more than supplemental nutritional assistance, more than WIC, more than CHIP, more than all these programs. Foster system is one of the biggest governmental systems for low-income people. But it's actually a very small amount of money, $30 billion a year, right? If we wanted to get to what the government spends on keeping white people wealthy, we need to be up at around $200 billion a year, not $30 billion a year. So I think the foster system also allows government spending on folks living in poverty to remain very, very low.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I appreciate you grounding us in the actual numbers and the history of, you know, how we got to this point. And so we only have 4 minutes left somehow. And I know that people will need to head out. So for our last question, I would love for any of the panelists to answer basically what role, if any, do you see for lawyers and law students in the movement to abolish ACS? And what does abolishing ACS actually look like to you? Which is a huge question, but if anybody wants to, you know, scratch the surface.
I would say no performative allyship. No performative allyship is allowed. You have to understand that you will not be leading the work. And the work needs to be led by the folks that are impacted by the problem. And if you're not in a space where you're elevating the leadership or investing in the leadership capacity of those impacted people in whatever space you're working in, then you're not the type of ally that we're looking for. We're looking for allies that are going to elevate and invest in the folks that are impacted in the issue. Oftentimes people come into spaces, again, with the deficit thinking about the group that they're going to be working with. And if I would say interrogate your own biases. You have to interrogate your own biases and don't come into spaces where you're going to be working with the people that are impacted by the problem, and then also want those people to explain or unpack the things that you should have unpacked and worked through before you got there. So if you feel the need to be a savior in those spaces, you could keep that and stay away. And I will hand it to somebody else. No performative allyship. If you're not going to get down and dirty with us and be okay with the impacted people leading the work, it don't make no sense for you to show up. Because people are definitely going to tell you about yourself. And people don't need to be spending time telling you about yourself when it's work to be done. And if you ain't come to get dirty and down in the trenches with us, then don't come through.
Big rock.
So you can feel better about yourself or be like, oh, we came in and we saved them. No. Full stop. Go and grab a stadium full of seats. We don't want that. We want you to be down here in the dirt, in the dust with us for liberation, because liberation of the impacted groups of people means liberation for us all, going back to the ecosystem. If there's a problem in one part of the body, there's a problem, or one part of the ecosystem, there's a problem within the whole system. So if you're not coming to uproot those things and don't come in there having the impacted people help you uproot your stuff, you do that work before you get there. Don't task the impacted people with your work, but come in to support and uplift their leadership and understand that we know we have the solutions. The people that are closest to the problems are oftentimes closest to the solutions, but furthest away from the resources to actually make those solutions come to be. And so if you got resources, ante up those resources, help us with those, give us some of your resources so that we can fix our own problems.
Yep.
And with that, I can pass it to someone else.
Abolishing ACS, you could do that. If you still feel the need that we should still it still should be something in place in case a child, unfortunately, is neglected or abused. Like build a village, have a place where it's one building and dedicate that whole building for helping people, whether somebody needs somewhere to sleep for the night, whether there's a lot of parents that use substances that their kids are not neglected. Make that a safe haven. Listen, you drop your kids off, go do what you gotta do, sober up, come back, we good. Make it a place where you have no food, we'll feed you, we'll feed your kids. You want help with getting your GED or a skill, we provide that too. Make one building, that whole building, and it should be in like every neighborhood. Maybe it's one building for every 10, 20 block radius. Could help. Or maybe, I don't want to say one building for every borough because they big, but maybe one building for every community. Let's say Harlem, East Harlem, Washington Heights, one building where everybody know they can come if they need help or resources. That's how you abolish ACS. Not snatching the kids out the house. Now, you can leave a small part. Like say there's a kid out there, kids that's actually getting physically abused, because I know that happens. Then we take steps. But don't come in just because a parent is doing substance and remove their kids. Let's get to the root of their problem, because maybe they're self-medicating and they have no insurance to get psychiatric help or whatever help they need. So stop, that's how ACS do. Boom. Everybody, you're just wrong. Y'all they don't want to get to the root of the problem. Maybe you need to find out what the root of the problem is and then find a group to fix it. Have a team. You know what I mean? You have a team when you have a baby. You know what I mean? You have a team when you go to school. You got your guidance counselor. You got this one. You got that. Why can't you have a team to help prevent stuff like this? ACS don't come. ACS don't have that. They have a family team meeting, but it's them against you. You know what I'm saying? They're not there to help you. They say they're there to help you, but they're really not. You know what I'm saying? So that's what you should have a team. And that's what my building called, and every building called the village. So everybody knows, this is the village, because that's how it takes a village to raise a child, right? So we call it the village. And you come in, and that's your team. And your team is there to support you. We're like Planet Fitness, no judgment. We will not judge. Come to us, you tell us everything, anything, lay it out. But if you
that's our community care network. That's what we talk about when you hear us talking about community care networks, is just what Ericka is speaking of. We need to create divestment from ACS and investment in community care networks, and understanding the communities that are most impacted. We already have the solutions. We've been resisting. We know what it is to resist. That's how we've been resisting. We've been surviving. Now it's about supporting us to thrive. And what does that look like for people to invest and support us in thriving? We're tired of just surviving. At least I am. I think Ericka is too. See, we ready to thrive.
Yeah.
I think these are the words to end on, since we have to end. I mean, they are beautiful words. They are true words, and they are like sort of the perfect place, I think, since we do have to. I know at least one of our panelists has a court date to get to, so we are so grateful that all of you could be here today to join us, and especially to our panelists for sharing so much of themselves and their wisdom, their experiences, and their real vision for what might really take shape. And I challenge everyone in the audience to really think about what rebuilding or truly re-envisioning this system might mean, and how radical and how broad that could really be. What is in the village that Ericka is describing. So on that note, thank you all very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thanks, everybody.
Mm-hmm.